Welcome to A Levels Academy Islamabad. In this video, we are going to understand what is boundary mark under the Land Revenue Act 1967. We will start from introduction. Boundary marks are official signs or indicators that show the limits or borders of a land. So basically, I'm going to draw a big land over here. So how will you know that this land has a boundary mark? I'm going to make a boundary mark over here. This thing is basically dividing these lands. So basically boundary mark over here is indicating that this land is separate and this land is separate. So this boundary mark is a type of indication that indicates or explain the person that is seeing the boundary mark that this land is divided. Okay, this is what a boundary mark is. These marks are very important in revenue administration because they help in identifying land ownership, preventing disputes, and maintaining clear land records. So basically, if there's a big land over here and it is divided with a boundary mark, so this land belongs to Ahmed, whereas this land belongs to Ali. Why this boundary mark is important? Is important because if a person who is collecting tax from both of these owners, with the help of this boundary mark, the tax officer will know that this land belongs to Ali and this land belongs to Ahmad. This helps in collecting tax. This helps in identifying the exact ownership, that which one is the owner of which land. Okay, it also helps in preventing dispute. Dispute means fights. So if the lands are divided into different boundaries, so it will not make any confusion. Under the Land Revenue Act 1967, there are special rules about how these boundary marks are set up and maintained. So basically, a lot of people don't know how to make a boundary mark. So if they want to make a boundary mark, they have to look at Land Revenue Act 1967 because this act had made rules that how a boundary mark should be made on a land. Okay, this whole thing is mentioned in the introduction. Now we will read the next heading. Next heading deals with the relevant sections. So these 4 sections basically highlights the boundary marks. So section 40 discusses the boundary marks and survey marks. Section 41 deals with responsibility for boundary marks. 42 deals with maintaining the boundary marks or maintenance. 43 deals with penalty for destruction or removal of boundary marks. So we will read all these sections step by step in the next headings. Let me just clean it out a bit. Now we got the definition of the boundary mark. So whenever you're writing any kind of a heading, if it includes any section, please write those sections in the exam paper because these sections have a lot of marks as well. Because if a student is putting section in a bold marker, that student will get more marks as compared to the other student who is not adding sections. So please add sections if you find any and highlight them with a marker. So in this heading you have to write a boundary mark is any permanent sign like a stone, pillar, wall or trench or tree that shows that the division between two pieces of land. So basically whenever most of you have seen villages. Okay, in villages you have seen there are lands that have divisions. Or if you talk about a house, the house you're living in, obviously it is in a boundary. Your house is not like connected to the other person's house, right? So it is not connected. Even if it is connected, they do have their own boundaries, right? So these boundaries are mentioned here. So you have to write that the boundary marks are basically the permanent signs or indicators that indicates us that this land belongs to this person and that land belongs to this person. And those indications or signs can be done by stones. You can like This is a land over here and this is a land over here. You can put a stone over here. Stone means a rock, or any kind of a stone. Okay, so these stones you have placed here like that. This is also an indicator or a boundary mark. If you don't have stones, you can also include pillars. If you have added pillars over here, this pillar is also a boundary mark. If you don't have a pillar, you can also add a wall. If you have add a wall over here and there's another land, so both these lands are divided with the help of a wall. This wall is also a boundary mark. But if you don't have a wall, if you have a tree over here between these two lands, the tree also becomes a boundary mark. Okay, so boundary mark could be in any of these ways. Okay, and due to them, their presence indicates the division of a land. So this is how a boundary mark is made. So boundary mark can't be done without a magic. Obviously, whenever you're making a boundary mark, you have to make a wall, you have to make a pillar, or you have to put a stone in the middle of the lands to divide them. So this division helps in dividing the lands. So this is the thing written here. These marks are used to identify village boundaries, field boundaries, or property lines. So if a person who has any kind of a property in their village, they will divide their properties with the help of stone, pillar, wall, trench, or trees. Okay. Next thing, they are fixed by the revenue department during land survey. So basically, in villages, normally there are no fixed boundaries, but some people in villages have placed few stones to indicate that this land belongs to Ali, this land belongs to Imran. But when you are registering these lands to the revenue department, then the revenue department officers come to your place and make a proper wall between these lands in order to separate them permanently. So obviously this is done with the help of the revenue department. Next is heading is types of boundary marks. So the type of boundary marks are: number 1, village boundaries; second type is field boundaries; third type is survey boundaries; and fourth is state boundaries; fifth one is temporary boundaries. So there are total 5 types of boundary marks. Let's start with the first one. First one contains: these marks show the outer limits of a village. So basically, the village boundary indicates the village land. Okay, this is the land of a person in village, and this is another person's land in village. So this is all based on village land. The second point is they help in defining where one village ends, another begins. So basically, this land, the whole land over here, doesn't has any boundary mark, but you are seeing a boundary mark over here, and there's another land starting. So this entire land is from a different village, and this entire land is from a different village. But this boundary mark is an indication that it is identifying that this land is from another village, and this is a boundary, and this land is from another village. This is also a method to identify the boundaries and villages as well, usually marked with large stones, wall, and trees. So basically, these type of lands can be marked with walls, trees, or even larger stones. So there obviously in villages you can't find a permanent wall built in between these lands, but you will find trees or stones in these lands, because the owners don't want their lands to be mixed up with the other person's land. So they just put some stone or big size rocks so that their land can be seen separate. This is how it is done in villages. Second is based on field boundaries. These marks show the divisions between different agriculture fields within the village. So basically, when some of you might have visited village, you have seen that the lands have few separations. Those separations are basically done because the owner of this land doesn't want this land to be mixed with this land, because this is not his land. Okay, so both owners want their lands to be separate. That's why they just make a boundary between the fields. So these are not like a place where a house is built, but these lands contain, any kind of agriculture thing growing, any tree is growing, maybe any kind of fruits are growing. So these are basically cultivation lands or fields, and they wanted to make them separate. So what they do, they will make a line or make a big space in order to make them separate. This is done in the field boundary marks, important for showing ownership and cultivation rights. So basically these boundaries or separation is done in order to maintain the ownership and to maintain the cultivation rights. So basically, if this land gets mixed with the other person's land, it will obviously make confusion, and both owners will be confused that this portion is not mine and that portion is mine. So they will obviously start fighting. That's the reason in field or cultivation land there's very important need of making a boundary. Third point is often marked by small stones, earthen mounds, and trenches. It also obviously, these type of fields are also divided with the help of stones. So they might put some big size stone in order to indicate that this is the end and this is the land of some other person. So this is how it is done in field as well. Let's now move on to the third point. Third point is based on survey boundary marks set during a land surveys by the revenue department. So these survey boundaries are basically done by revenue officers. Okay, the revenue officers. These revenue officers basically inspect and visit the lands. When they visit a land and they find out that this is not a big piece of one person's land, basically this land is owned by two parties or two owners. So these revenue officer will make a big partition between the land so that the owners can be divided. So this type of division done by the land revenue officer is known as survey boundaries. Second point is these marks help in identifying specific plots of land during official survey. Obviously, when a officer inspects the land, he finds out that the land is divided into two and it is not divided into two, then this officer will divide it into two in order to maintain the correct ownership of the land, usually permanent or numbered for official records. So basically, if this land is divided properly, so the officer will put, let me just clean it up a bit. Okay, so this is a big land over here, and the officer is dividing it and giving them a different number. So officer will give this land number 1A and this land number 2B, so that, and he will mention this number in the record. So this is a register you're seeing here. In this register, the record of the land is going to be mentioned that 1A is owned by Ali and 2B is owned by Imran. So this is how the records of the land are mentioned, because they give those land a specific or special names in order to maintain the ownership. Okay, this is how survey boundaries are done. So the last time means that the lands, when they are divided, they are given a specific number or indication that this land is divided, and it is given a specific number, and that specific number is basically the indication that this number of plot or land is owned by Ali. So this is how it is done in survey boundaries. Next heading is state boundaries. These marks indicates the boundaries of large estates or lands owned by families or institutions. So basically, if there are huge or big lands, so these lands which are very big, that's the reason they are called as estate boundaries, because these type of land are owned by a huge family. The owner is not one but more, like the owner can't be one, it could be more than 5, and those 5 owner could be a family. Okay, or could be an institute means that those 5 owners could be working for a business together, and these 5 people are thinking to build a factory here. So basically, if there's a huge land and more owner, that type of a land is called as estate boundary marks, because those lands are marked marked and named as state boundary marks. Second point is help in managing large land holding and avoiding disputes. So basically these type of a big lands and giving them indications that these are state lands helps in avoiding disputes. Now we have temporary boundaries. Temporary boundaries are sometimes temporary boundaries like wooden stacks or flags, often used during ongoing survey. So basically, if there's a land over here and this land is divided, so there wouldn't be a division. Okay, instead, someone would put a flag in order to indicate that this land belongs to Ali, and the other person will put a flag over here with it in a different color and write his name that this land belongs to Imran. But this is a very temporary type of a boundary, because obviously flag can fall away or break or anything can happen to it. But such kind of a temporary marks is done when there's an ongoing survey in order to obviously surveys are done by officers. So if an officer is obviously visiting a land and doing any survey, so he will himself put the flags in order to know that this if there's a flag over here, he will know that this color flag belongs to Ali's land and this color flag belongs to Imran's land. So this will help him identifying the lands. So it is a very temporary solution. So that's why it's done only with the help of surveys. These are replaced by permanent marks. Often the survey is complete. So obviously when the officer came to visit the land and figured out that this land belongs to Imran and this land belongs to Ali, and he had placed these flags. After placing this flag, the officer himself will make a boundary between those lands in order to make a permanent separation of the lands. Okay. Responsibilities for boundary marks. So the section 41 is started. In this section we will understand what the responsibility we have to do if we make a boundary mark. So the first line here is that the landowners and occupiers of land are responsible for maintaining the boundary marks on their property. So basically anyone who owns a land, any person who holds the property or a land is responsible to maintain the boundary, because if they do not maintain the boundary, it will make a dispute or problem for them in future. Okay, that is the reason it is their responsibility to make a boundary mark. Second part is that the Tehsildar or other revenue officer can order repairs if boundary mark are damaged. So basically the Tehsildar or a revenue officer are responsible because these people have the authority to build the boundary marks. So if the landowner do not have any kind of a boundary mark managed, or maybe his boundary mark got damaged, at that point these landowners or occupiers can go to the Tehsildar or to revenue officer and tell them to repair the boundary mark. Okay, this is done. Now we're moving on to the next section. Next section is based on maintenance of boundary. Section 42. The revenue staff regularly inspects boundary marks to ensure they are visible and correct. So basically the revenue staff, or even it could be one staff or more, they will visit and check that the boundary marks are correctly placed or made and they are visibly seen. Second thing they will also do that if the boundary mark is damaged or removed, the responsible person may have to restore it their own cost. So basically if the person who is owing a land and there's another person who's owing a land and there's a boundary mark over here, but that boundary mark got damaged, and if they got damaged, so one of them will be responsible to maintain that boundary mark with their own money and repair that boundary mark. Okay, so this whole thing is mentioned in section 42. Now moving on to the next section. Section 43 deals with the penalty for damaging for the boundary mark. So this section discusses the penalties or punishments. If someone destroys, removes, or alters a boundary mark intentionally, they can face fines or other legal penalties as decided by the revenue authority. So the revenue authority will put a fine on them or will punish them with any kind of other thing if they intentionally remove the boundary, destroy the boundary, or alter the boundary. Okay, this is the thing mentioned in section 43. Now moving on to the next points. This law is important to protect land and prevent fraudulent claims. So basically section 43 is made in order to protect land rights. So basically if the boundaries are destroyed, and if they're destroyed, then lands will get mixed up. That's the reason, if the land gets mixed up, both of the owners will not be properly protected. Their right of land will be destroyed, and they will be confused that which part of their land belongs to which one. So that's the reason these type of punishments are mentioned, so that both of owners can be responsible in maintaining their boundaries. Now we have the next heading based on importance of boundary marks in revenue administration. So these points you're seeing here are basically the important points you have to write. First is preventing land dispute. Boundary marks clearly show property lines, which reduces conflict between the landowners. So basically in the first heading you have to write that making boundaries clearly shows the property line, which help in reducing the conflict between the landowners. If there is a boundary mark mentioned in the lands, it will help both of the owners to figure out that which land belongs to which. So this is the reason boundary marks is very important, and it helps in disputes and fights. Second point is accurate land records. If you have obviously lands and they are divided, it will help in maintaining the record, because the revenue officer will know that this portion belongs to you and this portion belongs to another person. It will help in maintaining the record. They help the revenue department keep exact record of land ownership and boundaries. This is what you have to write. Second point is easy tax collection. Obviously, if you have your lands divided properly, then the tax collection itself becomes easier. With clear boundaries, the government can properly assess and collect land revenue. Obviously, that if this portion belongs to you and this portion belongs to another person, but if there is no boundary, what will happen is that your land will be combined. Then maybe you just have to pay this portion only, because this is the only portion you're the owner of, right? You're not the owner of this land. But if you do not have any boundary here, then what will happen is that maybe you have to pay more, because the revenue officer will think you're the owner of this much property and this much property isn't yours. But no, that isn't the truth. You're the owner of only this portion, not this, okay? But there is no boundary. That confusion will obviously make tax also increase on you. So that's the reason, if there's a boundary mark, so then equal tax will be divided among both of these owners. So this is the reason boundary marks helps in tax collection as well. Next one is sport and land transaction. Suppose if you have land divided, so if you want to sell it, you can easily tell the other party or the seller that, or to the buyer, that this land over here you're seeing belongs to me, and the boundaries are visibly seen. So what will happen is that you can easily sell the land. But if there is no boundary in the land and the other person's property is also mixed with yours, then the seller will run away and will get confused and will avoid purchasing your land, because he doesn't want to be in a conflict with the other person. So but if your land is properly divided, then any person will easily purchase your land and you can easily sell it, because there are boundary marks in your land that indicates that this portion is yours and this isn't yours. It will help making the land separate and help you sell the property easily. This is mentioned here. When buying and selling or transferring, boundary marks help ensure the right of piece of land is being dealt with. So that means that if the lands have proper boundary marks like this and like this, it can help easily transfer a property. Without boundary mark, transferring a property is super difficult task. Then we have the next heading is on legal evidence. So basically, in the legal evidence, in case of disputes, boundary marks serve as important legal evidence in court or revenue officer. Obviously, if you have a land over here, suppose this is a huge land. Let me make a good land. So this is a huge land over here. So if it is divided, so if you're going to court and tell to the court that this portion, this boundary over here belongs to you, then you can easily manage the case. But if there's no boundary mark between your land and this person's land, there's no boundary mark, then if you're going to court, it will not help you, because the court will say that where is the boundary, how we will know that this land belongs to you and how much portion belongs to you. That's the reason these type of the boundary marks also help in legal disputes. Next heading is planning and development. For infrastructure projects such as road or irrigation system, clear boundary marks are essential for planning. So basically, if there is a proper boundary mark made for yours and proper boundary mark made for another person and boundary mark made for a third person as well, if this person sells his property and wants to make, and the other person who buys this property wants to make a road, but obviously there are already boundary marks made for both of these land, so the other owner will not disturb these lands because they have the boundary mark, and will make a road from his own land. So this is the reason that if you have a boundary mark on your land, it will avoid mixing your land with other person. This is also important in planning and development methods. So in conclusion, you have to write all the above things in here shortly. So I'm going to repeat it once again. Boundary marks play a crucial role in revenue administration system by ensuring clarity, accuracy, and fairness in land matters. So basically, boundary marks help in administrating the revenue system, because the marks are basically a type of indicator that help us identify the exact owner of the lands. The Land Revenue Act, especially section 40 to 43, clearly defines the types, responsibility, and penalties related to the boundary marks. By marking and maintaining these boundaries, the government ensures smooth revenue collection, preventing dispute and sport legal land transactions, making them essential for effective land management. So the whole concept you're seeing here in this conclusion is the same thing that we have mentioned, we have studied above. So that's it for this video. Thank you for watching.